Good evening. How's everybody doing? It's hard to say we're doing great, you know, even if we're the type of positive person that normally answers that way during a time such as this. But thank God we're learning together. Let's light up the darkness. And we'll dedicate our learning today to the Chayalim, to the soldiers of Israel who are in harm's way now to defend Israel, to defend the children of Israel from unspeakable evil. A lot of people are saying a lot of things about what's going on right now. But I'm just so glad to hear so many public voices coming out, calling it what it is. We've been saying this for so long, but public discourse is starting to catch up with this idea that there are many people in the Middle East. There are many people in Israel and around Israel, but there are no two sides to this conflict. If the conflict is between Israel and Hamas, which it is right now, Hamas is not the other side. Hamas has no legitimacy whatsoever. This is a group of people, so-called people, monsters really, dedicated to the destruction, the rape, the pillage, the murder of Jews. That is their charter. And they're a betrayal of their own people. They do nothing for their people. They use them as human shields. And they have wrought the whirlwind, as it were, and may God, bless our soldiers as they go in and clean out these people who are not just the enemies of the Jews, they're the enemies of humanity, the enemies of civilization. We went to a rally today in support of Israel, organized here in Los Angeles by Stand With Us, wonderful organization. We met with Roz Rothstein. She's been giving this message and empowering especially college students to be equipped with the information so that they can message for many years, and she has a great organization. Many of you are familiar with Stand With Us. If you're not, great website. It will empower you to have the information at your fingertips when discussing these issues. It was great to see so many people coming out, and not just Jews, but so many allies and supporters of the Jews at this difficult time. So thank you for everybody who's supporting Israel, who's coming out, who's showing up, who's at the rallies. And everybody especially who is learning Torah and the merit of Israel and praying for the safety of Israel. And everyone, of course, asking what we can do. And in addition to sending resources and donating to good organizations that are supporting the soldiers of Israel and the people of Israel and the people who are healing, so many people need medical help right now. In addition to all those direct actions, we've talked about prayer and how important prayer is and how prayer is action. Sincere prayer is action, and learning is action. And also Torah mitzvahs, right? So in addition to learning Torah, if you've been thinking about taking on a mitzvah in your life, taking on a commandment that you weren't regular and stringent with before, such a good time to take on a mitzvah in the merit of Israel, in the merit of the Jewish people. Maybe you've come close to keeping Shabbos, and maybe this is the time to go over that line and be Shomer Shabbos and keep Shabbos. It's such a big mitzvah. It's life-changing. It really is. And the merit for you, for your family, for your descendants, and for the nation of Israel is huge. Keeping Shabbos is huge. Kosher eating, tzedakah, giving charity, right, to the hungry, to the homeless, but especially to those who are supporting Torah learning. A huge time to do that. Support a yeshiva in Israel. Support a yeshiva in your community. You can support accidental Talmudists, but this is in no way a pitch for our organization right now. but give charity, take on a mitzvah. This is a time to do it, and it makes a difference. It really makes a difference. Okay. Let's get to it. We have a double daf today. Oh, who's in the house? Yehudit in South Carolina, Sharon in New Jersey, Bill in Missouri, Bella in Florida, John in Maine, Paul in Chicago, Shandor in the Bronx, Nancy in North Carolina, David in Indiana, Lucy in Minnesota. Lots of people saying amen, thank God. Marjorie says shalom, and Marie in Freeport. Welcome, everybody. Let's do our job. Let's learn with focus, with concentration. Let's make that effort to absorb what we learn. It's not easy stuff we're in right now. It's a gift to us that what we're learning is not easy, because it's greater merit. Everything that we take on, that's more difficult is a greater merit, and we're dedicating our learning today to those who defend Israel. So it's extra, an extra measure of protection for them. Okay, we are starting right at the top of page 55a. We are working our way through chapter 2 here in Kiddushin, the 20th volume of the Talmud. Continuing our discussion of Mishnah number 9, and today we'll get into Mishnah number 10. And so we have this idea, so a priest who tries to betroth a woman with, portions of offerings that were given to him in order to consume them, right? A priest, when the temple is standing, some of the offerings, the guilt offering, the sin offering, part of that goes to the priest. Can he use that? Hopefully we're okay here. Can he use what he's been given to consume in order to give something of value to create betrothal? So no, he can't. And based on that discussion, we've been learning, well, what about any consecrated item? What if somebody tries to betroth a woman, right? A man tries to betroth a woman with an item, let's say an animal or money, or any item that he consecrated, like let's say he's going to make a donation to the temple treasury, or it's an animal that he's going to bring as an offering when the temple is standing. Can he use that item that's been consecrated to betroth a woman? Well, no, he can't. But what if he does it anyway? Is betrothal created? And that brought us to this debate between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. Very complicated, because even the sages are arguing what exactly did Rabbi Meir say and what exactly did Rabbi Yehuda say. But if we focus on one particular part of this debate, right? So Rabbi Meir says that if you've consecrated something and then you unwittingly use it, perhaps to create betrothal, or perhaps to barter, to sell it or to trade it for something else, and you didn't remember, you forgot, or you didn't know that it was something that was consecrated, and you tried to use it for your own purpose, right? So this is meila, this is misuse of consecrated property. And then the question is, well, does the betrothal take effect? Now, if it's unwitting, Rabbi Meir says we do not desacralize that item, right? It was consecrated, and now you try to use it for something of yours. If you eat it, okay, so it's gone, so then it is desacralized, and you're going to have to replace it. But if you try to trade it for something else, so if you can get it back, if it's possible to get it back, then we do not desacralize that item because you did it unwittingly. It remains sacred, and we undo the trade, the barter, the purchase, or the betrothal that you tried to accomplish with that consecrated item. That's the view of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yehuda says that if you appropriate that item unwittingly because you forgot or didn't know that it was consecrated, it is desacralized. Therefore, now it becomes, non-sacred, and it can be used for the barter, the trade, the betrothal. Therefore, the betrothal is valid. the exchange that it was used for is valid. You're still going to have to replace what you took of the sacred and bring an additional offering because you misused the sacred, but you desacralized it, and therefore the betrothal that you tried to accomplish with it is a betrothal, unlike the view of Rabbi Meir. And actually the law, the halacha, follows Rabbi Yehuda, right? The law follows Rabbi Yehuda. And because it is desacralized, if another person comes along and tries to use that item, now that it's been desacralized, they are not misusing the sacred because it is no longer sacred. Right? So that, in a nutshell, at least in a couple of aspects of this debate between Meir and Yehuda, between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda, is what we are dealing with. Okay, so we picked this up at the top of 55a. Now the Gemara is continuing its discussion about desacralizing property that was consecrated. So we learned in a Mishna there in Shekalim, right, Tractate Shekalim, which we've read, if there was an animal that was fit for the altar, and it was found straying from Jerusalem, right, in the environs, the suburbs of Jerusalem, and we found an animal. So why is there animals in Jerusalem? Is Jerusalem farmland? No, Jerusalem is not farmland. So if you find a stray animal near Jerusalem, odds are somebody tried to bring it to Jerusalem as an offering. Obviously, we're talking about when the temple is standing, and people were bringing offerings to the temple. So a stray animal, if it's the type of animal that's used for an offering, a sheep, a goat, a cow, odds are it was consecrated, right? Because you're finding it near Jerusalem, odds are it was somebody's animal that they set aside to bring as an offering. Therefore, you can assume, with great likelihood that that's a consecrated animal. Right now, already we have a mitzvah that if you find something that was lost, you have to try and return it. Now you have an additional obligation. Maybe it can't be returned. Maybe it's the owner would have despaired of ever recovering it. But the animal that you're dealing with here is a sacred animal. You can't just find it and go, woo! The owner despaired of finding it. There's no, he can't expect to have this animal returned to him because there's huge crowds. The animal has no markings. I put up an announcement, animal found, no one came forward. Great, I can add it to my flock. No, you can't, because odds are that was a consecrated animal. You're actually, if you now, take possession of that animal, you're going to have to deal with it as a sacred animal. And the problem is you're not sure what kind of offering it was. So it's going to cause you all kinds of difficulties to find that animal. It'll be much easier to ignore the animal, but we don't do that. So what do? So we learned in that Mishna in Shekalim that there was an animal fit for the altar that was found straying from Jerusalem and as far as Migdal Eder. And similarly, if it was found within that distance from Jerusalem in any other direction, right? So basically they define the kind of suburb area of Jerusalem. So it is presumed that the animal came from Jerusalem. Most of the animals in Jerusalem were designated for offerings, and presumably this one was as well. Now, if it's a male animal, males are presumed to be burnt offerings, as only males can be brought as burnt offerings. Females are presumed to be peace offerings because it is permitted to bring female, sheep, female goats, as a peace offering. So let's just do a quick review of the types of offerings, because that is going to affect what we're talking about here. And it's always good for us to review. Now that we've talked about offerings often enough, sometimes when you read this in the Torah, your mind says, what do I need to know the differences between offerings? 2,000 years since we were able to bring offerings. It's very important to try to get our minds around which offering is which. A burnt offering. This is totally consumed on the altar in the temple, right? An olah. This is called an olah. Because olah is like elevation, like we make aliyah, means we go up to Israel. Something is elevated, right? It's called a burnt offering. We translate it that way, but often it's translated as an elevation offering. We call it a burnt offering because this is an animal that is entirely consumed on the altar. No one eats from it. A burnt offering is totally consumed on the altar in the temple. It may be brought from male cattle, male sheep, male goats or doves. Private individuals generally bring this offering as a gift offering. There are times when it is sacrificed to atone for the willful, right, intentional, non-fulfillment of a positive mitzvah. You knew that you had a positive mitzvah incumbent upon you, and you decided not to bring it, and later you regret that, so you bring a burnt offering. Or for immoral or idolatrous thoughts. And there are certain situations where individuals are required to bring a burnt offering together with other offerings. Many of the communal offerings, for example, the daily offering and many of the additional offerings brought on Shabbos and festivals, are elevation offerings, burnt offerings. Burnt offerings are considered offerings of the most sacred order. They may be slaughtered in the northern portion of the temple courtyard, and their blood is sprinkled at the two opposite corners of the altar, meaning the northeastern and southwestern corners, so that it touches all four sides. Afterwards, the animal's hide is removed and given to the priests, and its body is divided into pieces, and the remainder of the blood is then poured out at the base of the altar, and the limbs, or the parts that you cut up after the skin is taken off, they are all burnt entirely on the altar. Shalamim, peace offerings. What are peace offerings? These are male and female cattle or sheep, and they may be sacrificed as peace offerings. As offerings of lesser sanctity, right? Peace offerings, they are optional, and that's why they're considered lesser sanctity than burnt offerings. Burnt offerings are optional in some situations, but obligatory in others. Peace offerings are always optional, and they are offerings of lesser sanctity. They may be slaughtered anywhere within the temple courtyard. Their blood is sprinkled on the two opposite corners of the altar in such a manner that it will descend on each of the altar's four sides. Part of each peace offering is burned on the altar. Part is given to the priests, namely the breast and the right hind leg, and the rest is eaten by the person bringing the offering, right? So we see that there were shlamim when the Passover was observed in Jerusalem, when the temple was standing, right? And the Pesach itself wasn't going to be enough to feed the group of people who are registered to have the Passover lamb together. And so they would also bring a peace offering so that they would have more what to eat and it would be holy. Right? And so part of each, so that it's shared, right? Some for the altar, for the table, for God as it were, some for the priests, some for the people bringing it. And so it would be eaten by the person bringing the offering with his family anywhere in the city, either on the day that the animal is sacrificed, the following day, or during the intervening night. With the exception of the festival peace offering and a few other cases, peace offerings were brought voluntarily. They were gift offerings. But you see some of the festival shlamim, it was obligatory to add, and so there's certain situations like that. All right, so now we're talking about offerings. So the Gemara questions this idea that if you find a stray animal near Jerusalem, if it's a male, you assume it's a burnt offering, and if it's a female, you assume it's a peace offering. And the Gemara says, well, whoa. But are males only burnt offerings and not also peace offerings? A male can be a peace offering. As peace offerings can be male or female, a male animal that was found might have been designated as a peace offering. So Rabbi Oshaya said, we are not speaking here of bringing the animals themselves as offerings. Rather, right, it's not that you find the animal, so now you walk it up to the Jerusalem and to the temple and give it there as an offering. Rather, we are dealing with one who comes to obligate himself to consecrate their value, right? The person who finds the animal wants to consecrate the value of the animal in case it had been designated as an offering, thereby redeeming the animal and desacralizing it, right? That's why we're talking about this. So, you find this animal, it might be an offering, it might not. Just in case it is, assess its value. Okay, I'm going to use that money to purchase another animal that I am going to bring as an offering. Because I redeemed this animal that I found in case it was holy, now I'm going to add it to my flock. right? But it's not like, finders keepers, I just found, added to my estate, as it were. No, it's going to cost me, right, to purchase another animal to use as an offering in the place of the one that I just found. There's no net gain, as it were, financially. But this is what the person does, right? So he desacralizes the animal that he found in case it was consecrated and uses the money to purchase another offering. And what offering should he purchase? Okay, so now we're saying if it was a male, burnt offering. If it was a female, peace offering. And this is what the Mishnah is saying. In the case of males, we are concerned that perhaps they are burnt offerings, so the money must be consecrated for the purpose of burnt offerings as well as peace offerings. And this is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Meir, who says consecrated property is desacralized if it is misused intentionally, right? We're taking it on purpose for ourselves, so now we're desacralizing it, and we're going to replace it with another offering. Therefore, the person may redeem the animal and must use the money to purchase both a peace offering and a burnt offering, thereby avoiding all uncertainty. He's going to have, at the end of the day, because he found one animal, he's going to purchase two. Right? He didn't have to purchase anything, and before this, now he's doing it. The Gemara asks, and can something that has inherent sanctity, such as an animal that has been designated as an offering, can that kind of animal be desacralized? You could say money could be desacralized. Can you take an animal that somebody designated to be a burnt offering and redeem it and desacralize it and mix it in with your flock? Can you do that? That's what the Gemara is asking. But didn't we learn in a Mishnah in Tractate Me'ilah, page 19b, there is no misuse after misuse with regard to consecrated property. And this means that if one misuses consecrated property, the item is immediately desacralized and the prohibition of misuse no longer applies to it. And this is so apart from the case of the misuse of an animal designated as an offering, and apart from the case of the misuse of service vessels, right? Vessels from the temple itself. These do not become desacralized when misused. Okay, if somebody set aside an animal that he's going to donate to the temple treasury, maybe you could redeem that. You could desacralize that. But if somebody set aside an animal to become an offering, can you say, oh, okay, I will redeem it, use money, to redeem it, and then take that money and buy a different animal and bring that as an offering? But wait a minute, but the first animal was consecrated to be an offering in the temple. How can you just step in here and desacralize it? This Mishnah seems to say, no, you can't desacralize it if it was an offering that has inherent sanctity as opposed to something else that had been consecrated, for a holy purpose, but didn't possess inherent sanctity like an animal dedicated to be an offering on the altar. So that Mishnah continues. How so? If someone was riding on a consecrated animal and another came, now this is the idea of no misuse after misuse, right? So if somebody was riding on a consecrated animal and another person came after him and also rode on it, and yet another came and rode on it, they have all misused consecrated property. This is if the animal cannot be desacralized because it has inherent sanctity. Then everyone who makes use of it for personal reasons is guilty of me'ilah, misuse of consecrated property. Similarly, if one was drinking from a golden cup used in the temple service, right? A service vessel is not just some cup that we could say, oh, I'm going to consecrate this and give its value to the temple or donate it to the temple treasury, but rather an actual service vessel from the temple that the priests use in the holy work of bringing offerings, that cannot be deconsecrated because it possesses inherent sanctity. So similarly, if one was drinking from a golden cup used in the temple service, and another person came and drank from it, and a third person came and drank from it, they have all misused consecrated property. So the Gemara asks, as this indicates that an item that has inherent sanctity is never desacralized, how can it be redeemed? And the Gemara answers, that Mishnah from Tractate Me'ilah is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, whereas this Mishnah from Tractate Shekalim is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Meir. So the Gemara asks, let us hear, meaning let us infer from the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda to the opinion of Rabbi Meir, meaning Didn't Rabbi Yehuda say that consecrated property is desacralized if it is used unwittingly? And yet those items that have inherent sanctity, whether they're used unwittingly or not, are not desacralized. Now, according to Rabbi Meir as well, although consecrated property is desacralized if it is used intentionally, items that have inherent sanctity should not be desacralized. And the Gemara answers that there is a difference between the two opinions. In the case underlying Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, the one who misuses the consecrated item unwittingly, he does not intend to withdraw that item from its sacred status into a non-sacred status. Rather, he just wants to use it for himself, which is why an item that has inherent sanctity is not desacralized. Whereas here, in the case underlying Rabbi Meir's opinion, one who acts intentionally to use a consecrated object, his intent is to take that item out of the realm of the sacred and into the realm of the non-sacred, and that's why it is desacralized. Now the Gemara questions Rav Oshaya's explanation of the Mishnah. Wait a minute. Say that you have heard Rabbi Meir express the opinion that one can desacralize a consecrated item in the case of offerings of the most sacred order, like a burnt offering. But did you hear him express this opinion in the case of offerings of lesser sanctity, like a peace offering? If Rabbi Meir holds that offerings of lesser sanctity cannot be desacralized, the explanation of Rabbi Oshaya would be insufficient, as it does not account for the possibility that the animal is a peace offering. So one of the sages, and his name was Rabbi Yaakov, said to Rav Oshaya, this is learned by means of a kal v'chomer inference and a fortiori inference. If offerings of the most sacred order can be desacralized, is it not all the more so the case that the law would apply to offerings of lesser sanctity? It was also stated, Rabbi Chama, the son of Rabbi Akiva, says that Rabbi Yosef, the son of Rabbi Hanina, says that Rabbi Meir would say, consecrated property is desacralized when misused intentionally, but it is not desacralized when misused unwittingly. And this applies both to offerings of the most sacred order and to offerings of lesser sanctity by means of the kal v'chomer inference. If offerings of the most sacred order can be desacralized, is it not all the more so the case that the law should apply to offerings of lesser sanctity? Now we're on 55b. Rabbi Yochanan wondered about Rabbi Oshaya's explanation of the Mishnah. And does one say to a person, arise and sin in order that you may gain? Even if consecrated property can be desacralized intentionally, one is not allowed to redeem an animal designated to be an offering. Rather, Rabbi Yochanan says the Mishnah does not refer to redeeming an unblemished animal, but to a case where the one who found the animal waits for it until it develops a blemish. Meaning you're going to feed it and take care of it and protect it. It's going to cost you resources to take care of this animal that might be sacred until it develops a blemish, at which time you know it cannot be brought on the altar. At that point, it would no longer have inherent sanctity, but merely sanctity that adheres in its value, so the animal could be redeemed, and that money could be used to bring a different offering. But how long will it take for the animal to develop a blemish? Could be years. You're going to take care of that animal all that time. And then this person brings two unblemished animals of the same value, and he stipulates that if the animal he found was a burnt offering, the first animal should be a burnt offering in its stead, while the other should be a voluntary peace offering. But if the animal that he found was a peace offering, well, then the second animal should be a peace offering in the place of the one he found, and the first would be a voluntary burnt offering. After doing so, he may eat the animal that he found. Now the Gemara continues to clarify the Mishnah. The master said on the previous page, males are presumed to be burnt offerings, as only males may be brought as burnt offerings. And the Gemara asks, why should a male necessarily be a burnt offering? perhaps it is a todah, a thanksgiving offering, or sometimes called a thanks offering, which can also be brought from a male animal. And the Gemara answers, the Mishna means that he can also bring a third animal and make a similar stipulation, that it should be either a thanks offering in the place of the animal he found or a voluntary one. And the Gemara asks, but if he brings a third animal as a thanks offering, doesn't a thanks offering require the bringing of bread as well? And the Gemara says yes. And so if he wants to cover all his bases, he also brings all the loaves of bread that accompany a thanks offering. And the Gemara asks, but perhaps it is a guilt offering. All right, now we first learned burnt offering, also called elevation offering, and then we learned peace offering. Now we're talking about thanks offering, and we're about to talk about guilt offering. What are those? The karban toida, the thanks offering, is specified in the Torah as a unique type of peace offering that is brought by one who experiences salvation. The sages received a tradition based on Psalm 107 with regard to the types of salvation that obligate one to bring a thanks offering. And the circumstances are the successful crossing of the sea, emergence from the desert, recovery from illness, and release from prison. Along with bringing the animal, typically a sheep, one also brings a meal offering in the form of 40 loaves of 4 varieties, 10 of each. And the 4 types of bread are leavened loaves called chalot chametz, loaves of matzah called chalot matzah, wafers called rekikin, and measures of flour mixed with water and oil called revuchot. That's the thanks offering. The guilt offering, that's the asham. So a guilt offering is one of the offerings of the most sacred order, and it may be eaten only by priests on the day it is offered and the following night. Only priests eat the guilt offering. The law of its slaughter, the sprinkling of its blood on the altar, and the burning of its fats are like those governing peace offerings. A ram is the only animal used for a guilt offering. Like the sin offering, the guilt offering is a propitiatory offering brought to compensate for human failing. There are 6 occasions when an individual is required to bring a guilt offering. In 5 of those cases, one is aware that he or she has committed a sin or is obligated in an offering due to some other cause. This type of offering is called a certain guilt offering, a guilt offering that is certain. You know you need to bring it. And that's called an asham vadai, because the one who brings it is certain that he must atone for his behavior or undergo purification. For example, one who denies a debt and takes an oath to that effect, but who later confesses that he took a false oath and does owe money that he found, borrowed, or stole, he brings a ram as a guilt offering. By contrast, one recovering from tsaras, skin condition, usually brought on by lashon hara, evil speech, brings a guilt offering as part of his purification process rather than as a result of sin. The 6th case of a guilt offering is associated with a sin offering and falls upon someone who is unsure of his behavior. He's not sure if he committed the transgression that obligates him to bring a sin offering, so he brings the guilt offering of uncertainty, and that's called the asham talui. Okay, let's keep reading. The Gemara asks, but perhaps the animal that he found outside of Jerusalem is a guilt offering, which is also brought only from male animals. So the Gemara answers, okay, the animal for a guilt offering is in its 2nd year, and the Mishna is referring to a case where an animal in its 1st year is found, the lamb, right, the kid. The Gemara asks, well, but perhaps it is the guilt offering of a mitzorah, or the guilt offering of a nazir, right? At the end of one who takes a vow of nazir is to abstain from cutting his hair and drinking any product of the grapevine. And when he finishes the days of his naziris, he has to bring certain offerings for his purification, and one of these is a guilt offering. We read when we did Tractate Nazir, right? Why guilt offering? Because he shouldn't have taken a vow to make something prohibited to him that God didn't prohibit to him. That's one, possibility. Okay, so but perhaps it is the guilt offering of a mitzorah, the guilt offering of a nazir, which are brought from animals in their 1st year. And the Gemara answers, the Mitzorah and the Nazir, these are not common. Right? People bringing offerings because they're a Mitzorah or a Nazir, this is not common. It's much more common if these animals are brought. They're guilt offerings for other situations. So we don't concern ourselves for uncommon possibilities. And the Gemara asks, but perhaps this animal that you found is a Pesach, right? The Paschal lamb or the Paschal goat, which is also brought from male animals. The Gemara answers, that is not likely because with regard to the Pesach, if it is up to or in its time to be slaughtered, the owners carefully guard it, right? The Pesach, people come up at Passover. They've all as a group agreed to, slaughter this one Paschal lamb together and eat it together on the night of Passover. They're going to be very careful with it. They're unlikely to lose it. So losing a Pesach would be very uncommon. And therefore, we don't make a decree about things that are uncommon. So if it is a Paschal offering that is not offered in its proper time but was left over and is offered later, it has the same laws as a peace offering. So the Gemara asks, well, perhaps the animal that he found is a firstborn, a Bechor, which can only be brought from male animals, or animal tithe, which can be brought from male animals. So the Gemara answers, well, with regard to which law would the possibility that it is a Bechor, a firstborn animal or animal tithe, need to be taken into account? It is with regard to the law that one is permitted to eat them in their blemished state, as firstborns and animal tithes do not need to be redeemed if they develop a blemish. They're simply not brought as offerings, but they go back to the flock because they are not offerings in the same way as these offerings we've been discussing. These found animals as well are eaten, only in their blemished state, as one may not redeem and eat them until they develop a blemish, as explained previously. So the master says above, females are presumed to be peace offerings, as it is permitted to bring a female peace offering. So the Gemara says, well, how do you know it's a peace offering? Maybe it was a thanks offering, which can also be brought from female animals. Gemara says the Mishna means that he must also bring a third animal and make a similar stipulation that it is either a thanks offering in the stead of the found animal or a gift offering. So the Gemara asks, but if he brings a third animal as a thanks offering, doesn't a thanks offering require the bringing of bread as well? And the Gemara says yes. So if he's going to bring because it might be a thanks offering, and he's going to bring an animal as a thanks offering to cover that possibility, yeah, he brings the loaves of bread with it. So the Gemara says, well, but maybe that animal that he found is a sin offering, which can be brought from the female animals. And the Gemara answers, the animal for a sin offering is always in its first year, and the Mishnah is referring to a case where the animal in its second year was found. So the Gemara says, well, but perhaps it was a sin offering whose year had passed without it having been sacrificed. And the law in such a case is that the animal is left to die because it cannot be brought as an offering. So the Gemara answers, such a case is not common. We don't decree for uncommon cases. The Gemara asks, this is the case if the animal was in its second year, but what is the law if it was found when it was in its first year? And the Gemara answers, it was taught in a Baraisa. Hananiah ben Chakinai says, if one found a goat in its first year, it is brought as a sin offering. And the Gemara asks, can it enter your mind that it is brought as a sin offering? How can it be sacrificed as a sin offering due to the mere possibility that it had been designated as a sin offering? One cannot bring a voluntary sin offering. Sin offerings are only obligatory. Rather, Abaye says he treats it as though it were a sin offering, meaning he conveys it into a cell and it dies on its own, which is what happens to a sin offering that ends up not being brought as an offering. And the sages taught in Tosefta of Meiser Sheni 115, one may not purchase an animal with second tithe money outside of Jerusalem. Second tithe money, when the temple was standing and we tithe. Farmer brings in his crop, first 2% to the priest, next 10% to a Levite, next 10% in 4 of the 7 years. Second tithe. What do we use it for? To eat and drink during our pilgrimage to Jerusalem on a pilgrimage festival like Passover, Shavuos, or Sukkot. Now we're on page 56a. Okay, so you redeem the produce so that you have money to spend, right? Because you don't want to carry, let's say you're a watermelon farmer, you don't want to carry watermelons to Jerusalem. So you turn them into money. Now that money is your Meiser Sheni that you're going to use for what you're going to eat and drink while you're in Jerusalem during the festival. Okay, so what's it say here? That you cannot use that money. One may not purchase an animal with second tithe money Why not? You're going to eat the animal during the festival. Sure, you can use it to purchase an animal that you're going to eat during the festival, but you can only do that in Jerusalem, right? You redeem your watermelons, you turn it into money, you got to carry that money with you until you reach Jerusalem. Then you buy food and drink in Jerusalem, including animals that you're going to, slaughter, cook, and eat. But you can't spend that money before you get to Jerusalem. And if one purchased an animal unwittingly without realizing that he was using second tithe money, then the money returns to its place, meaning that it is considered to be an erroneous transaction and it is void because the purchaser would prefer to bring the second tithe money to Jerusalem rather than to travel with an animal to bring it as an offering. So if he purchased it intentionally, the animal is brought up and eaten in its proper place, i.e. in Jerusalem. So Rabbi Yehuda said, in what cases this statement said? It is said with regard to one who acted with intent. And he purchased the animal from the outset for the sake of a peace offering. And in any case, he had to bring the animal to Jerusalem. But with regard to one who acted with intent to withdraw the second tithe money from its consecrated state and to desacralize that money, whether his act was unwitting, in which case it was an erroneous transaction, or his act was intentional, either way, the money returns to its place, meaning we undo the transaction, the money remains consecrated, and he has to take that money to Jerusalem, whatever he purchased with it. If he has time, he hasn't already blown it, he undoes the transaction. So the Gemara questions this statement, but didn't we learn in the Mishna that Rabbi Yehuda says, if the second tithe was used intentionally, he has betrothed the woman with it. And the betrothal, which is a type of acquisition, is effective, right? If we say that he used second tithe money, whether intentionally or unintentionally, we undo the transaction. Then if he used second tithe money to create betrothal, we say there was no betrothal. The money returns to the man and it remains Meiser Sheni, second tithe money, for him to use and during the festival in Jerusalem. Rabbi Lazar said the law in the Mishna is based upon the assumption that a woman knows that second tithe money is not desacralized by her acceptance of the betrothal. And it is as though she has agreed that she would ascend and eat it in Jerusalem. So Rabbi Yirmiyah objects to this, but there are cases of a non-kosher animal, or slaves, or land, with regard to which a person knows that the second tithe money is not desacralized by being used to purchase them, as we learned in a Mishnah. Right? So what you can use Meiser Sheni money for? What you're going to eat and drink during the festival. So if you buy non-kosher food with it, well, you can't eat that. It's not permitted to eat that. So you certainly can't eat it in Jerusalem during the festival. So what happened to that transaction? Is it a transaction or not? Sounds like not. Let's see. Rabbi Lazar said the law in the Mishnah. No. Rabbi Yirmiyah objects. There's the case of non-kosher animal or slaves or land, with regard to which a person knows that second tithe money does not become desacralized by being used to purchase those items. As we learned in a Mishnah in Meiser Sheni 1:7. One may not purchase a kosher animal or slaves or land with second tithe money, even in Jerusalem, right? You're not outside of Jerusalem. You can't even purchase a kosher animal. You have to wait till you get to Jerusalem to purchase that animal. Even within Jerusalem, you cannot spend Meiser Sheni on anything that's not food and drink. If it's non-kosher food, that's not food, right? A Jew can't eat that, so it's not considered food. And slaves or land or any other type of thing, souvenirs, tchotchkes while you're in Jerusalem, not food and drink for you to consume during the festival. So if you spent Meiser Sheni on that, you undo the transaction, the money remains Meiser Sheni, and goes back to your pocket. The seller keeps whatever he was going to sell to you, and you keep that money, right, for food and drink. And if one did purchase a non-kosher animal or slave or land, and he can't get it back, right, he can't get the money back, then what should he do? He must eat other food corresponding to their value. He must have other money in his pocket. He has whatever he spent on stuff that wasn't illegitimate for Meiser Sheni. He has to replace that Meiser Sheni money and use it for legitimate uses of Meiser Sheni while he's in Jerusalem. So It must be that here, in the case of the Mishnah, we are dealing with a woman, right, in terms of using Meiser Sheni to create betrothal. Does it work or not? It must be that we are dealing with a woman who is devoted to the meticulous observance of the commandments, especially the laws of ritual purity and teruma and tithes, who knows the law of tithes, and she accepts it for betrothal. She accepts that Meiser Sheni for betrothal with the awareness that she must use that Meiser Sheni when she goes up to Jerusalem, right? You don't have to use your Meiser Sheni, it sounds like, for your own eating and drinking. It's a good question. Like, if you have Meiser Sheni money, can you go up to Jerusalem and feed your friends with it? Can you go up to Jerusalem and feed your family with it? If you're going to betroth this woman with this Meiser Sheni money, with the understanding that she will also use it only for the things that Meiser Sheni is good for, and now you're betrothed, it's like you're married, you're going to go up together, maybe that works. An ordinary person, however, who is not well versed in these laws, so in the case of the purchase of an animal, the seller thinks that the second tithe money has been desacralized through the purchase of the non-kosher animal. That's very problematic. So the master said, if one did purchase them, he must eat other food corresponding to their value. So the Gemara says, whoa. But why should he do so? Why not say that the money must simply return to its place and we undo the transaction? Just as was the ruling there, as Rabbi Yehuda said with regard to one who acted with intent to desacralize second tithe, where the seller was penalized for acquiescing to the sale. And Shmuel answers, and now we're on 56b, the case here is where the seller fled with the money. And there is no way of voiding the sale and returning the Meiser Sheni to the purchaser. So the Gemara comments, and the reason is that he fled. But had he not fled, we would penalize the seller by requiring him to return the money. And the Gemara asks, and let us penalize the buyer and require him to take an equivalent sum of money to Jerusalem. And the Gemara answers, it is not the mouse that steals, but the hole that steals. In other words, a mouse cannot steal an item unless he has a hole in which to hide it. Here too, the money would not have been desacralized without the help of the seller, and the seller ends up with that money. That's why he's the one penalized. So the Gemara questions this logic. Whoa. But if not for the mouse, what has the hole done? Obviously, the mouse steals the cheese. So since they both are integral to the prohibited act, each of them is deserving of the penalty. The buyer and the seller should have to lose something now that they did this prohibited act of using Meiser Sheni in a purchase that was not for what's legitimate to purchase with Meiser Sheni. And the Gemara answers, it stands to reason that anywhere that the forbidden item is, i.e. anywhere that the money is, and in this case it is with the seller, there we should penalize because we can identify it. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 9. Here comes Mishnah number 10 here in chapter 2. With regard to one who betroths a woman with orla, prohibited fruit because it came from the first 3 years of growth of a tree, or with diverse kinds in a vineyard, right? Grapes or some other item that was grown in a vineyard where there were grapes and wheat, let's say, were planted in the same plot of land. That's a prohibition. That's prohibited. Kilayim. We cannot grow diverse kinds in the same plot. There has to be spacing, right? So if that spacing was not observed, then this becomes prohibited fruit or prohibited wheat or whatever the two things that were grown together that shouldn't have been grown. Grain and grapes planted together. Or one who betroths a woman with an ox that was sentenced to be stoned, right? This was an ox that gored, right? An ox that became dangerous and hurt a person or killed another ox. Or with a heifer whose neck is broken, right? The heifer whose neck is broken, this is in the case that a body was found between towns and we don't know, who killed him. And there's a ritual we go through which involves this cow whose neck is broken as an atonement for this murder that is an unsolved murder. So in that situation, this cow cannot be used to betroth a woman, right? Because this cow has been dedicated for some other use. It is prohibited to use it for somebody's personal use, including betrothal. Or with the birds of a mitzora, an offering that is brought for purification at the end of somebody whose purification process who had saras. Or with the hair of a nazir, right? He cuts his hair at the end of his period of naziris. or with a firstborn donkey, which needs to be redeemed or is sacrificed, not as an offering, but it's killed, or with meat that was cooked in milk, right? Okay, non-kosher food. Can you use it to betroth a woman? Obviously not. If you're a Jew and you're following the Torah, how are you going to betroth a woman by giving her non-kosher food? Or any kind of non-sacred animals that were slaughtered in the temple courtyard. If he betroths her with any of these items, the woman is not betrothed because it is prohibited to derive benefit from any of these items. By contrast, if one sold these prohibited items and betrothed the woman with the money that he received from their sale, she is betrothed. As in these cases, one may derive benefit from the money he receives in exchange for the forbidden item. He is still going to be guilty of a transgression, and he has to, restore money or bring an offering or pay a penalty. That's beside the point. But he can't use those prohibited items to create betrothal. If he sold them, okay, now the money is not sacred money. He shouldn't have that money, but he does. He can use the money to create betrothal, but he'd have to replace that money with other money and go through other kinds of atonement. That's the Mishnah. Now the Gemara. So the Gemara explains the source of the law that it is prohibited to derive benefit from the items which are mentioned in our Mishnah with regard to Orla, fruit from the first 3 years of growth of a tree. From where do we derive that one is prohibited from deriving benefit from Orla? The Gemara answers, this is as it is taught in a Baraisa. The verse, Leviticus 19:23, quote, and shall have planted all manner of trees for food, then you shall count the fruit thereof as forbidden. 3 years shall it be forbidden to you, arelim, forbidden as Orla. It shall not be eaten. So, from this verse, I have derived only a prohibition against eating it. From where do I derive that one may not even derive benefit from it? From where do we derive that one may not derive benefit from it in another manner, and one may not paint with the dye that can be extracted from the fruit, and one may not light a lamp with its oil? How do we know all these things? The verse states, then you shall count the fruit thereof, or lato, as forbidden, araltem, to include all these types of benefit in the prohibition. In other words, when the Torah said it's prohibited, it sort of doubled up on the language. It said, so we so often see in the Torah when it says it's very forbidden, what it says is it is forbidden, right? Or it is off limits, right? Or tzedek, right? Justice shall you pursue. Sometimes we translate as that, justice indeed shall you pursue it. But when the Torah doubles words for emphasis, the sages learn out additional commandments or additional prohibitions from the doubling. So in this case, not only may you not eat fruit that is produced by a tree in its first 3 years of growth, but you may not derive any benefit from it either. The Mishnah stated that one may not betroth a woman with diverse kinds in a vineyard, like if grain and grapes were grown in the same plot of land. From where do we derive that one is prohibited from deriving benefit from this diverse mixture? Chizkiah said, the verse states, you shall not sow your vineyard with diverse kinds, lest the growth of the seed that you have sown be forbidden, pen tikdash, together with the yield of the vineyard. Chizkiah expounds, lest the growth of the seed that you have sown be forbidden, pen tikdash, as lest it be burned, pen tukad esh, indicating that the seed of diverse kinds must be destroyed by fire so that no benefit is derived from it. Rav Ashi says that the phrase pen tikdash indicates that it is comparable to consecrated property, as if it said, lest it become consecrated, kodesh, and one is therefore prohibited from deriving benefit from it, just as one may not derive benefit from consecrated property. So the Gemara questions Rav Ashi's interpretation. If diverse kinds in a vineyard is compared to consecrated property, then just as consecrated property transfers its sanctity to the money with which it is redeemed, and then the consecrated property becomes desacralized, perhaps so too diverse kinds in a vineyard should transfer their sanctity. It's not that they're sacred, it's that they're prohibited, but it's like something that is sacred because it's off limits. So perhaps the diverse kinds transfer their sanctity to the money with which it is redeemed, and then it becomes desacralized, so to speak, and it would be permitted for eating or for benefit in some way. Contrary to this logic, the Mishnah taught that if one sells diverse kinds in a vineyard, the proceeds can be used for betrothal, indicating that it is not forbidden to derive benefit from this money. So rather, it is clear that the correct derivation is as that of Chizkiah. So the Gemara, let's just read that again. If diverse kinds in a vineyard is compared to consecrated property, then just as consecrated property transfers its sanctity to the money with which it is redeemed and becomes desacralized, so too, diverse kinds in a vineyard should transfer their sanctity to the money with which they are redeemed and become desacralized. Contrary to this logic, the Mishnah taught that if one sells diverse kinds in a vineyard, the proceeds can be used for betrothal, indicating that it is not forbidden to derive benefit from this money, but not from the items. Rather, it is clear that the correct derivation is as that of Chizkiah, right? But he already violated the law by selling it, right? That's the point they're making. He should have burned it. He sold it and he got money for it. Okay, that money came into, it's a little weird, like it's almost like stolen money. Can you betroth a woman with stolen money? This would seem to indicate, yes, the betrothal would be created, but you still have to replace that money. And it's only because money itself is fungible that maybe this is possible. Let's put a pin in this idea and keep going. Now, I'm almost done for today, so questions or comments, please get them in. Now, the Gemara continues its analysis of the Mishnah. And there's a note here. Almost all of the commentaries explain that pen to kadesh means that if he does sow diverse kinds together, he plants grapes and grain together, he will have to burn it all in a fire, as he is prohibited from deriving benefit from it. And the Meiri explains that the word pen is a term of prohibition, and the phrase should be understood as prohibiting one from burning diverse kinds in a manner by which he will derive benefit. You can't even derive benefit from the fire when you burn up this stuff. So if you sell it, you definitely made a transgression. That money came into your realm, right? And then you are able to create betrothal from it. That seems to be a little bit unexpected, but I think it's because money is fungible. Because you already derived the benefit from this prohibited mixture, you became liable to bring a sin offering. You're going to have to pay a penalty. There's all kinds of other problems for you. But the money that you use to create betrothal, that betrothal stands. So the Gemara says, from where is it derived that one is prohibited from deriving benefit from an ox that is sentenced to be stoned? And the Gemara answers, as it is taught in the Baraisa, it is taught by inference from that which is stated with regard to an ox that killed a person. And if an ox gore a man or a woman and the person dies, the ox shall be stoned and its flesh shall not be eaten. But the owner of the ox shall be clear. That's Exodus 21:28. Now, don't I know from this verse that the stoning makes it an unslaughtered animal carcass and it is prohibited to eat an unslaughtered animal carcass? Right? If it's stoned, then it was not shechted. It was not slaughtered in a kosher manner. So obviously you can't eat it. So what is the meaning when the verse states its flesh shall not be eaten? The verse is telling you that even if one slaughtered the ox after its verdict had been reached but before it was stoned, it still is prohibited to eat it. And the Baraisa continues. This is our last teaching for today. From where is it derived that one is prohibited from deriving benefit from the ox as well? Not just you can't eat it, even if it's shechted properly, but you can't derive any benefit from it. The verse states, but the owner of the ox shall be clear. And the Gemara asks, from where may it be inferred that one may not derive benefit from this ox? Just because it says the owner of the ox shall be clear? And Shimon ben Zoma says, this is like a person who says to another, so-and-so was left clear, naki, of his property, and that means he has no benefit from it at all. Similarly, but the owner of the ox shall be clear means that he may not derive benefit from the ox at all. That's what I've got for today. Let's take a few questions or comments. The hour is late, so it shouldn't be too many. Load. Sharon, sounds like the thanks offering is the predecessor of benching Gomer. Yeah, I had that same thought. Sharon is referring to when a person, flies overseas or is saved, from a life-threatening situation, either an illness or a car accident or something like that. So then when there's Torah reading on Monday or Thursday or Saturday, the person can come up, to where the Torah is being read, and after the Torah is read, he can say a special blessing, blessed is the Lord who saved me, and everyone basically says, Amen, may he who has done good to you do good for you always, right? And it's the same situations as in the past when the temple was standing, a person would bring a thanks offering. Right, and Joseph asked, what is the difference between consecration and inherent sanctity? So basically, consecration, things can be consecrated. If it's consecrated to be an offering, it can't be deconsecrated. So something that cannot be deconsecrated, that is something that has inherent sanctity, right? So like a vessel used in the temple service or an animal set aside to become an offering. Whereas money that you set aside or an animal that you set aside that you donate to the temple for the maintenance of the temple, you can redeem it. You can trade it for money, get the animal back, and then give that money to the temple. So that's consecration that can be deconsecrated. That does not have inherent sanctity. That's what I've got for us today. With God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, Wednesday at the regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific. Have a good night. And in the merit of the learning we did tonight, please God watch over the soldiers of Israel who are going into harm's way now to defend the land and the people.